Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 58 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from Build a Cloud Day in San Francisco. Today we have our first ever live roundtable session. So, Build a Cloud Day has just concluded, and we're here with a number of the organizers and speakers from the events. And so, guys, why don't we go around the table here quickly? Let's start with you, Joe.
I'm Joe Brockmeier, and I'm here basically just organizing this event and giving everybody an opportunity to talk about their role in the cloud infrastructure or ecosystem.
Awesome. John?
John Willis of Stratus, also Botchical Loop on Twitter. I was one of the speakers today, so I spoke basically a dry run of what I'm going to be doing Friday at PuppetConf, which is kind of short titled Deming to DevOps.
And it was very good.
Oh, thank you.
Very good.
I'm David Nalley, and I was here to speak today about Apache Cloud Stack. And if you care to follow me on Twitter, I'm KE4QQQ. Yes, I made that purposefully difficult for people. I don't have a cool name like John, so I will at least make it difficult for you.
Radio Hammers Unite!
Very nice.
My name's Brian Bullard. I work for a company called Fifth Planet Games and another ISP called SureWest Communications. I've been working heavily with CloudStack and speaking about CloudStack today and how awesome it is.
Cool. And Brian, you have the distinction of being the first ever actual customer on the Cloudcast. We talk to a lot of vendors, a lot of people in the industries, and a lot of like analysts and things like that. And we're always like, we need customers. So
You're a token customer.
Yeah,
we really appreciate your input.
That's awesome. I'm super lucky.
And finally, we have John Mark Walker.
Yes, I am John Mark Walker. I am the Gluster community guy, as I self-profess Gluster community guy. I work for Red Hat, where I was acquired by them almost a year ago today.
Very cool, very cool. So for the session, folks, let's just real quick around the table a little bit more in depth about exactly what we talked about. David, tell us a little bit more about the upcoming CloudStack 4.0 release and the Apache Foundation and some of the other details from kind of recap the session for everybody.
So Apache or CloudStack itself is not really something new. It's about 4 years old, which is pretty ancient in the infrastructure as a service space. But CloudStack was recently donated to the Apache Software Foundation back in April, moved to the incubator, and is working through getting out its first Apache release. So that release has a number of new features, but the interesting thing is that we moved into that new governance model. We're working through all of the process that Apache has and learning their process for getting releases out, and hopefully we should have that mid-October, I'm thinking. So.
Very cool, very cool. And I know there's two Johns, so I have to. John Willis.
John 1. John 1 and John 2.
Yeah, John 1. So your presentation was very interesting and a little different today. I actually saw the web streaming version of the Chicago Build a Cloud, and that was the kind of, as you said, the more polished version that you kind of tend used to giving. So give us a little bit of an update of what's different and what you're kind of introducing at the PuppetConf.
Yeah, so thanks for Citrix for inviting me to these. I really do enjoy the Build a Cloud. They particularly talk about DevOps, which I have a deep passion for. Typically, I just tell the story of DevOps, and that was the Chicago one. That although I did during that one talk about, hey, I am preparing for this kind of mega speech that I've been wanting to give, and so just to give you a kind of short version is Ben Rockwood at Lisa end of last year gave this amazing presentation called DevOps Transformation. It was the keynote at Lisa in Boston, and not only myself, but just about everybody who saw it, it flipped. It was just awesome. And he talked about the history of science and really talk about some thought leaders that have really, that really are meaningful to this thing we call DevOps. So ever since I've seen that presentation, and I've had a lot of opportunity to meet Ben at different meetups and DevOps days, and he's just an encyclopedia of these guys, and he's just driven my passion. And so when the PuppetConf came up, I thought, what the heck? I really honestly didn't think they'd accept the presentation. I said this kind of putting the science back in computer science and Deming to DevOps. And so this one was really focused on this idea that there are these like really awesome companies today that are running in this DevOps model, Etsy's, Netflix, and there's some secret sauce there. And my presentation was a conversation about that. It is my belief that these companies have indirectly learned from the science thought leaders of the 20th century. Starting with Heisenberg, through Deming, Goldratt, and I try to make this show the patterns of relationship. So.
Yep, and it's very different in the fact that it's certainly a technical presentation doesn't tend to give a lot of history in our industry, right? And given some industry history and some thought leadership that wasn't related to this industry at all, quite frankly, and really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and again, I go back to thanking Ben Rockwood again, because that he did actually talk about many of these leaders and why they're important for us to learn from. My idea today was to take it one step further in that, trying to really identify the patterns that these guys, the way they thought, counterintuitive, the things that they put in place that now are this. When you think about DevOps right today, that there's still it's still a small percentage of people that run in this kind of DevOps way. And I always say there's 5% of the companies actually doing DevOps, and 95% are doing, anti-DevOps, if you will. and what's amazing is all these kind of counterintuitive ideas of these scientists of the 20th century, I think, have paved that way for that 5%, which I hopefully will be 30% or 50%.
Sure.
So.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I think one of the interesting things that John and I talked about during one of the coffee breaks was, he's outlining this history, and we tend to think of technology, and particularly some of this move to DevOps, as being really transformational. And manufacturing companies were doing this 30, 40 years ago. The people who were coming up with these ideas were doing it pre-World War II. And we constantly think we've done something new and awesome, and they've really, what we're doing is rediscovering work that they did 60 years ago easily.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Very cool. All right, so Brian, your presentation, tell us a little bit about that and some of the highlights of your session as well.
It was my first presentation really ever, and scary at first.
You did good though, man. You did good.
I think I powered through it.
Except for the part where he threw up in the middle. It was great.
We had a bucket nearby. It was fun.
I didn't like that whole fist fight thing that you had. But other than that, yeah.
Although that was part of the show.
Oh, there you go.
The CloudStack crew has been very friendly to me over the last year, and I've just kind of wanted to pay back the favor and show people how we're using it, and it's building efficiencies for me, and it's helping me out, and I love it. Same thing with Gluster. I mean, it's funny sitting next to the Gluster community manager, because my supervisor was asking me, well, ask him about GUI. What's going on there?
Watch. Now you have your answer.
Yep. So I texted him back. I said, who cares about GUI?
There you
Give
go.
me APIs.
There you go. Right. What I really found interesting about yours was a combination of, I really like you were kind of talking a little bit about API strategy and the private cloud and AWS, and the fact that CloudStack, having a compatible API strategy there really helped you in your organization, and also, quite frankly, your business just never would have probably even happened if it wouldn't have been for some of the cloud technologies that you utilize to kind of stand it up and keep it running.
Yeah, I mean, when they started, they were running low on funds already. So it was like, it did successful, and it scaled out appropriately. They went from 3 to 4 employees to 40 employees over 2 years, and it's thriving right now.
Yep.
Like, we've got 3 new games coming out. It's not slowing down at all, and it's been phenomenal, something phenomenal to watch and be part of. Like, I originally started by finding them on Craigslist, and I went into it thinking it was going to be a couple kids with nothing, and it ended up being like almost life-altering for me.
So this is another example of sort of open source powered growth. I mean, how could you have possibly scaled to the extent that you needed to without, open source powering what you did?
It's impossible. I mean,
it's not necessarily the cost; it's just the speed and agility. I mean, if you need to get stuff running fast, you need to iterate quickly. How do you do that without an open source solution behind it?
Yeah, even if it was really cheap, just going through the sales cycle.
Yep.
What's an enterprise sales cycle? 6 months to 18 months.
Well, preaching to the choir too, right? The adaptability, right?
Right.
Just the fact that I'm sure just like everything. In fact, the kind of the interesting thing now is the monsters like the Facebooks and this new X.com, which is they're starting to say things that they will not acquire technology that isn't open source because at their level of scale and complexity, they are convinced they have to modify the code.
Yeah, it's completely turned heads in my organization where I work, whereas they were kind of enterprise only. But with some of the stuff I've been doing, it's changing their whole outlook.
What was the term you used in your presentation for the old servers?
Ticking time bombs?
Yeah, the ticking time bombs, right?
I've got a few of those in both environments.
We all do.
Right. So finally, John Mark Walker.
JM, make it simple.
JM, there you go. So tell us a little bit about yours finally.
Well, I like to talk about, when I give my presentation about the Gluster community and Gluster FS, I like to give more than just the technology behind it. I mean, a lot of people want to know about the technology, and I'm happy to oblige them, but I think it's important to know the philosophy behind the project, how we started, sort of where we've been, why we're doing what we're doing, and what we ultimately want to accomplish. You can download a manual and get the sort of list of commands you need to do something, but in my presentation, I really want to convey not just that. I'll give some overview of the technical architecture and stuff like that, but it's really about what we're about and sort of give someone something tangible that they can take home and then sort of drive their thought process as they go forward. So
very cool, good. So I'm going to circle back around to this API strategy for a moment and just kind of throw a question out to everyone. How important is it to really pick an API strategy up front and really do a lot of design around that? Is it something that is, make or break from the get-go? Is it something you can kind of make right and left turns as you go?
Are you talking from a consumer perspective?
Consumer perspective, like you're the customers that everyone talks to here.
So I think the API piece is, in many ways, a nice rabbit hole for people to jump down. And I really think that the people who are smart are the folks like Adrian Cole and Gemus, who are writing abstraction libraries that say, "Hey, Design Cloud." Sorry, I figured you were gonna shout that out anyway. So I was hoping you would pimp your own stuff. George Reese, who wrote that, but so there's. They figured out that if you can become that broker between the various models, you can move around pretty seamlessly. Where that falls apart is when you start consuming the stuff that isn't common. Deploying a virtual machine works. Whether it's EC2 or GoGrid or CloudStack or whatever, that works regardless of which abstraction library. If you want to do something like RDS or Dynamo or something like that, you all of a sudden that doesn't work on any cloud. So you've kind of locked yourself in. Even if the abstraction library supports it, you've locked yourself in regardless of that abstraction library. I think that really is the smarter strategy, though, is using the abstraction library. I don't know if I may be smoking crack. And
No, you're spot on, I think. I mean, I was trying to think of a broader sense of APIs like Apogee and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously, this is a cloud day, so right, of course.
We're on the Cloudcast.
Yeah, of course, right. So stick with what we know, right? But one of the things I will say, and I think all of the, except for Amazon, the one of the problems is the immaturity. I think that I kind of joke now, so being at Stratus and having to deal with these abstractions and having to do serious stuff with infrastructure as a service APIs, we see a lot of issues, right? And
Sure.
and so I say that it used to be you did this, you wrote the code, you did this, and the last thing you did was documentation. Well, now I think it is you did this, you do this, you write the code. Then you do the documentation, and the last thing you do is, let's look at what the APIs have changed, and that seems to be the predominant model in infrastructure as a service cloud delivery of APIs. Metadata formats change at whim, and I think that before we can get really serious about using, I don't know what your experience is, but our experiences of all the clouds, they're all offenders of this. That a new version will completely change the format of something as simple like identifying the instance that just got started.
Yeah, I may be talking ignorance here, but like a global API, like a layer for the APIs, or something that would convert those APIs where everyone talks to each other and they know what they're doing with their APIs would be awesome.
Right. Again, but if the vendors kind of have this cowboy attitude about, or not thinking about like that has to be as important as the UI. I think more important, right?
People more important. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, unfortunately, I think that it doesn't manifest that way, right?
Yeah. But to one of your earlier points, you said that 95% of the companies out there today are doing the anti-DevOps pattern, and if that's true, then 2.5%, maybe 1% have adopted cloud computing effectively. So we are still so very nascent.
Yep.
That I don't think that things are going to stabilize. They should stabilize, and people should care about that upgrade path.
Yeah.
And handling growth in a sustainable way. Don't just suddenly deprecate. Have a deprecation period if you must, or just don't break things in the first place.
Yeah.
But sure. I don't think we're anywhere near that. I mean, we're in such a nascent market when it's only the choir that has adopted your sermon.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think that's the answer to the question is that I think the consumer today just has to be flexible.
Yeah.
Because they have no choice because we're in such an early stage of this.
Well, and have we reached a point, because I will say this one thing, kind of sitting listening today, I think in every presentation today at some point, Amazon was mentioned.
No.
And of course they are, right? Because you can't do anything with cloud computing without mentioning them at least once. It's required in the presentation, right? Then we're Netflix, right?
What was the company you were talking about?
Exactly. But here's where I'm going with that. Again, circling back around to this API strategy, has AWS or really won the API war? Do you have to be compatible to be a player? Or is it more like you're saying, do you write abstraction shims, or everyone look into your crystal ball for a second. What do you need to,
It's important to remember what David was just saying. So even if you take the position, which is not unreasonable, that Amazon is well out front, the number of companies that have adopted Amazon, EC2, AWS, whatever, all of their services, is still a very small percentage of the market.
Absolutely.
So they may have captured a large percentage of the 2% of the market that's actually doing things on the cloud, public cloud. But I think it's a far cry from saying they have everything wrapped up and they own the APIs and everything. I mean,
they have quite the head start.
They do.
Well, they have a head start.
And they're running really fast, too.
Yes, they're not slowing down. That's the thing.
Not to go back to all the manufacturing stuff and the automotive manufacturing that John brings up in his presentations, but if you look at the early days, companies like Ford owned the automotive market as far as percentage of vehicles consumed. And the market still dramatically changed when it matured.
Yep.
Not that they're a 2-bit player now, but they certainly aren't. They are no longer the single dominant player.
Yeah, they were overwhelming.
Well, actually, what's interesting is that there were actually, I forget a number, but before kind of Ford kind of invented mass production, there were like 50 or 60 ridiculous amount of, and they were all kind of, well, I'll buy the yellow one that has purple dots on it.
Right.
But then Ford just like through automation, so you could make the auto just like
You can have any color you want as long as it's black.
just like annihilated the competition.
They did, and that same automation and early advances there has allowed Amazon to take that early lead. Will that continue once we get past that 2, 3, 4% of the market?
If you had this discussion 12 years ago, what you would have been talking about is how can Linux possibly compete with Solaris when it has such a lead in the market, and Linux is so cowboy, and things change so quickly.
Yeah.
How can that possibly work?
That was the Red Hat guy.
Sorry.
So
John too, to be clear.
and
There was Red Hat John. That's what we're calling you.
Red Hat,
Guilty as charged.
I certainly think that Amazon is more competent than Sun was, but I wouldn't say that you need to be static and everything at this point where the market's still growing.
Sure.
Yeah, that joke writes itself. Right
And
there.
really, the Unix market was pretty mature and stable,
Right.
And Linux was still able to disrupt all of that. They didn't just disrupt Solaris; they disrupted HPUX and a number of other Unix players. So.
And it's not just the open cloud either. Amazon has this tiny little company called Google that's trying to compete with it. I hear there's this other little company in Redmond, Washington, people may have heard of, that's trying to horn in on that business. So I wouldn't call it locked just yet.
Here's the thing I think that is important to note that gets missed by a lot of views, and what is Ben Black, right? So Ben Black wrote a great article recently about why he thinks Google is going to succeed, and it's the point that it's unfortunately everything looks like a nail to me. So
Is DevOps? It's a subversive thing when you think about it. Is it enabling? Is it empowering to the sysadmin on the floor, or is it going to be the end of his job?
it's like,
Or is it both?
I would say it is. It is not removing his job. It's like saying, I've been doing this now 35 years, right? And I can tell you every pattern of this new thing that comes in where the fear is, there was mainframe automation, automated operations. It was going to replace operators. No, what it did is actually improve the operators' lives and jobs. And, Chef and Puppet do not, could be foreseen. It is, in fact, it was and still is very threatening to sysadmins.
Huh.
And selling Chef for a while. The enterprise would look at it and say, "Oh, that's going to put."
Because
me out of work."
the common theme you hear now is like, oh, if we reduce our IT staff by 90% and we move all public cloud, then more money for us.
Well, that's a different. That's a whole longer discussion. Because that's a cloud. So the idea that DevOps, right? So DevOps is about making things more efficient,
right.
Velocity of innovation. I always say it's the 80-20 flop, where if your people today are doing 80% junk work and 20% innovative investment, things like DevOps, Chef, Puppet, infrastructure as code, cluster, whatever, actually flop that. Where now what you're actually seeing is those people are using 80% doing innovative things and 20% junk or muck, right?
Okay.
And so I think that's the, do you lose some dead wood? Absolutely. But now on the cloud thing, I think that's another interesting question, because people make this mistake on the cloud and they look at this, it just kills me. They look at this kind of ROI discussion, and it's such a silly discussion, is that, I could buy 10 servers and I can, and cost it out over a year, and it's going to cost this, and I can basically go to Amazon and, get the N, per hour on an X large or whatever, and say, okay, done. No, it's ridiculously not done. There are so many human costs to that transition, and talking about manufacturer changeover time, that are so that just think that starting from architectural deficiencies of working on a bare metal infrastructure and then going to commodity infrastructure, not bringing your infrastructure people with you, your sysadmins. Oh, I didn't think we needed those guys. I thought the cloud did that for me. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and that's why that whole calculation of RI is like just.
But I do think that there's a class that gets affected by it. So, we saw tape libraries, which are a great example of some of the automation that I think DevOps encourages. And when I look there aren't many people employed as tape changers anymore.
Right. But they went to other things.
Hopefully, they went to other things.
Right.
Do I think that some of the role of people who would do those really junior sysadmin tasks like provisioning machines by hand are going away? When DevOps becomes mainstream, sure. But I'm amazed at the people who still have jobs doing that as
But
it is.
it depends on the culture again, right? So
Sure.
like what I was talking about, one of my takeaways, right, is that create people, not software, right?
Right.
And so the thing is you build a culture and environment where the subject matter expertise of the people in your organization are based around the organization.
Right.
And so a tape hanger isn't, this is an extreme example, but a tape hanger isn't really a tape hanger. A tape hanger is somebody who understands the IP and the value of that organization, and so that person, even in a tape hanging scenario, probably brings stuff to the table if you've cultivated the organization properly.
Right.
That should be able to use in any capacity.
Well, the operative word there is if you've created the right kind of culture.
That's right.
That's
It's also freed up resources. Like if I didn't have to work on all these crappy physical machines all the time,
exactly,
and I actually had a lot of automation built in, I could work on your next PaaS or SaaS or whatever,
or innovative
I
things
think
for the
it's all,
company.
a lot of it's going to the development portion of it. Like it's not so much infrastructure anymore; it's development with infrastructure. It's very.
But what I see when I see people fearing this entire DevOps thing is that they see the efficiency it drives, and instead of taking that efficiency as a business advantage, people see that as a cost reduction. And
that's a very important distinction.
It really does get back to the cultural issue, and the importance that DevOps is not a series of tools or a series of even methods that people adopt.
I mean,
it is that culture.
Well, and the enlightened business people today, again, look at Amazon for a whole different set of reasons. I always joke about, imagine the conversation between Bezos and the CFO 8 years ago when they were investing unbelievable amount of money in technical debt of infrastructure.
Yep.
And they were like, well, how is that going to pay off? Oh, just trust me. And look how it pays off today. Right? So it's leadership that understands, the investment value of those type of decisions.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. So
All right,
I'm
we gotta wrap it
gonna
up.
wrap this because we got to run. So real quick, guys, go around the table real quick. Website or Twitter or whatever. What's the best way to follow either you or your company's products?
This is Joe Brockmeier. The best way to follow me is on Twitter, and that's JZB. So it's real easy to find.
Cool.
John Willis, Botchikaloop on Twitter. I also am at stratus.com.
David Nalley, and Twitter is KE4QQQ. That's 3 Qs. And cloudstack.org for the project.
I'm on Twitter too. It's Bullardo916, and I have like 4 total followers. So.
And you're
Hit
Brian
me
Bullard.
up. Yeah,
I
it's
bet
Brian
you
Bullard.
double that.
I know, already after
Brian Bullard. I've already messed up your name.
After the talk, I increased it by 3. So.
And I'm J.M. Walker, and you can find me. I'm at John Mark on Twitter, JOHNMARK, or you can find me on Gluster.org all the time.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Thank you, everyone. So, if you like the show, tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. If you have a question or feedback, we would love to hear from you. Please email us at show@thecloudcast.net. That is it for this week, and thank you very much for listening.